The chill of the onyx keep seeped through Alara's threadbare coat, a predatory cold that had nothing to do with the autumn night. It was a sentient cold, the ancient breath of a fortress carved from a mountain's heart, and a king's despair. Every footstep on the polished obsidian floors echoed like a judgment. She was here for a job, a ridiculously well-paying job that every other girl in the impoverished human quarter had been too terrified to accept. Nanny to the Vampire King's heir. It sounded like the beginning of a grim folktale, the kind where the maiden ends up bloodless and forgotten. But her younger sister was sick, and the apothecary's prices were as sharp as a vampire's fang. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. A severe, unsmiling vampire named Gregor led her through halls vast enough to swallow cathedrals. Suits of ceremonial armor, black as polished jet, stood sentinel, their empty helms seeming to track her progress. Portraits of long-dead monarchs, their eyes impossibly alive with cruel intelligence, lined the walls. They were all sharp angles and predatory grace, a lineage of beautiful nightmares. King Cailan, the current ruler, was said to be the most formidable of them all. A king who had lost his queen in childbirth and now ruled his court and his grief with an iron will. The nursery was a stark contrast to the rest of the keep. It was the only room that held any warmth, a space of soft grays and deep blues, with a single hearth crackling merrily. But the warmth was fractured by the sound that had apparently defeated a dozen prior applicants, the frantic, heartbreaking wails of an infant. In a carved bassinet of dark wood, Prince Valerius was a tiny, red-faced tempest. He was small, his skin holding the pale translucence of his kind, a dusting of silver-white hair already thick on his head. His cries were thin but piercing, filled with a pain that felt too large for his little body. Gregor grimaced, the expression pulling at his taut skin. He has been like this for hours. None of our kind can soothe him. Your predecessor fled an hour ago. The king is displeased. Ilara's heart clenched. She saw not a monster, not a prince, but a baby in distress. She approached the bassinet slowly, her hands held out in a gesture of placation. The scent of ozone and old magic clung to the air around him, a byproduct of his volatile, nascent power. She ignored it, focusing on the child. "May I?" she asked softly. Gregor gave a stiff, resigned nod. Ilara reached in and gathered the small, thrashing body into her arms. He was surprisingly solid, radiating a strange, feverish heat. She held him close, rocking him gently, her cheek against his downy hair. The screaming continued, a raw, desperate sound that scraped at her soul. She tried humming, shushing, all the usual tricks. Nothing worked. Desperation began to prickle at the edges of her resolve. This was it. She would fail, just like the others. The thought of her sister's pale face, the debt, it spurred her on. There was one last thing. A secret, foolish thing. A memory of her own mother, a ghost in the fog of her past, singing to her when shadows crept too close. She took a deep breath, the scent of the baby, like winter air and sweet, unblemished life, filling her senses. And she began to sing. The words were soft, a forgotten language that felt like home on her tongue. It wasn't a song she had ever consciously learned, it was simply there, embedded in her memory like a birthmark. Noxan ima, luxan ima, cor meum ad te clama, night soul, light soul, my heart calls to you. The melody was simple, a rising and falling cadence that spoke of starlight and safety. It was a song of deep places, of roots and stone, and the quiet dark that comes before the dawn. She closed her eyes, pouring all her desperate hope, all her longing for a safety she'd never known, into the ancient lullaby. The baby's frantic thrashing began to subside. His cries softened into hiccuping sobs, his tiny fists unclenching. He turned his face into the curve of her neck, his strange heat a comforting weight against her skin. The ozone smell in the air dissipated, replaced by the simple scent of milk and sleep. She continued to sing, her voice a fragile thread of silver in the cavernous silence of the onyx keep. She was so lost in the moment, in the miracle of the child's peace, that she didn't hear the heavy doors to the nursery swing open. She didn't feel the sudden, crushing weight of a gaze that could freeze fire. She didn't know that the simple, forgotten lullaby she sang was a key, and that she had just turned it in the lock of a king's heavily guarded heart, unleashing a storm she could never have imagined. The last note faded from her lips as the baby finally drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep. And in the ringing silence that followed, a low, dangerous voice spoke from the shadows. "Where did you learn that song?" In his study, 3 floors below, Kalen felt the child's distress like a spike driven through his own chest. The bond between a vampire sire and his heir was absolute, a torment of shared sensation when the child was in pain. For weeks, Valerius had been inconsolable. The court physicians, ancient and wise, were useless. The child was not sick, he was grieving. He was reacting to the echo of his mother's death, the violent severing of his first bond, a wound Kalen understood all too well. He stared, unseeing, at the tactical map of the northern wastes where rogue clans were gathering, a threat he could barely focus on while his own son, his last link to his beloved Alara, screamed in agony. He had been through 12 nannies in as many days. Human women. It was a risk, a desperate gambit. Northwest vampire of the court could get near the child without their own predatory natures aggravating his distress. But the humans fled, terrified of the child's raw power and the king's cold fury. He was about to rise, to go to the nursery himself and endure the psychic backlash of his son's pain, when a sound drifted down through the stone. It was faint at first, a thread of music so fine he almost dismissed it as a trick of the wind whistling through the keep's spires. But it grew stronger, a woman's voice, clear and pure. And the melody. The melody struck him like a physical blow. It was impossible. He froze, his hand clenched on a silver letter opener, the metal groaning under the sudden pressure. It was a song from the deep past, a lullaby from the first blood accords. A verse of the Canticum Lumen, the Song of Light. It hadn't been heard in the world for 500 years, not since the last of the Lumen line were hunted to extinction by their rivals. The song was a failsafe, a harmony of blood and magic designed to soothe the unique distress of royal vampire infants, to reinforce their connection to life when the pull of the long dark was too strong. Only one with the blood of the Lumen could sing it. His mind raced. A spy. An assassin with an impossibly clever cover. Who was this human girl, this nanny, who held the ghost of a dead bloodline on her tongue? The agonizing pressure in his chest began to recede. Valerius was calming. The screaming had stopped. The song was working. Rage, cold and sharp, warred with a desperate, burgeoning hope. If she was a threat, she was the most insidious he had ever faced, wielding his son's peace as a weapon. If she was not, then what was she? A miracle? A ghost? He pushed back from his desk, the heavy chair screeching in protest. He swept from the room, a silent wraith of fury and confusion. His guards flattened themselves against the walls as he passed, sensing the storm brewing within him. He didn't slow, didn't hesitate. He took the stairs 3 at a time, his long coat billowing behind him like wings of shadow. He arrived at the nursery door and pushed it open, the ancient wood groaning. The scene before him stopped his heart. The human girl, Alara, her name was, stood bathed in the soft glow of the hearth, the firelight catching on the warm brown of her hair. His son, his precious, tormented Valerius, was asleep in her arms, his face peaceful for the first time in weeks. The girl was humming the last few bars of the melody, her eyes closed, an expression of profound tenderness on her face. And in that moment, Kalen smelled it. Beneath the mundane scent of soap and wool, beneath the scent of her humanity, there was something else. A faint, buried fragrance of ozone and starlight, of sun-warmed stone. The scent of the lumen. It was real. After centuries of dust and myth, it was here, in his nursery, holding his son. The last note of the song faded. He let the silence stretch, a palpable thing, before he spoke, his voice a low growl that held all the menace of a king, and the desperation of a father. "Where did you learn that song?" Her eyes flew open. They were wide and hazel, flecked with green and gold, and for a split second, they held only the gentle exhaustion of a caregiver. Then she saw him, a towering silhouette of darkness against the light of the hall, and terror flooded them. Raw primal fear. It was a look he was used to, but tonight, it grated on him. She instinctively tightened her hold on Valerius, her body forming a shield around the infant. The gesture was so fiercely protective, so maternal, it sent another shock through him. "Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice trembling as she executed a clumsy curtsy while still holding the prince. Her fear was a sharp, coppery scent in the air, but the scent of starlight beneath it was a siren's call to his ancient blood. I didn't hear you." "I did not ask for apologies," he said, his voice dangerously soft as he stepped fully into the room. The doors swung shut behind him with a definitive thud. "I asked a question. The song. Where did you learn it?" He advanced on her slowly, watching her every reaction, his senses on high alert. He could hear the frantic rabbit beat of her heart, see the pulse hammering in the delicate skin of her throat. An instinct, old and possessive, rose in him, urging him to close that distance, to feel that pulse beneath his thumb, beneath his lips. He crushed it down. She was a mystery to be solved, a potential threat to be dissected. It's just a lullaby," she stammered, taking a small, involuntary step back until her legs hit the side of a plush armchair. She was trapped. "My mother used to sing it to me," her gaze flickered, a shadow of old pain crossing her features. "I don't even know what the words mean. It just helps me feel safe," a lie. Or a truth she did not understand. A Lumen would not know the words in any scholarly sense, they would know them in their blood, in their bones. "Your mother," Kalen mused, his voice dripping with skepticism. He stopped just a few feet from her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her body, close enough to see the way her knuckles were white where she clutched his son. "What was her name? What was your family line?" Ilara shook her head, a helpless gesture. "I don't know. I'm an orphan. My village, there was an attack. Rogues. I was just a child," her voice cracked on the last words, and the scent of genuine, remembered grief filled the air. It mingled with her fear, creating a heady, confusing perfume. An orphan. Found after a rogue attack. It was plausible. The wars of the last century had created thousands like her. It was also the perfect cover story. He reached out, his movements unnaturally fast, and gently brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek. Her skin was soft, warm, and alive. She flinched as if burned, a tiny gasp escaping her lips. But his touch wasn't an attack. He let his fingers trail down to the edge of Valerius's blanket, his gaze locked on hers. "My son has not known a moment's peace since his birth," he said, his voice losing some of its edge, replaced by a raw weariness she couldn't have faked. "And you, a human girl, walk in and sing him a forgotten song that stills his pain. You will forgive my suspicion." He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was issuing a warning. "You will remain here, in the keep. You will not leave these walls. You will care for the prince, and you will be watched." Every moment it was a prison sentence, gilded though it might be. Her eyes widened, the terror shifting to a new kind of horror, entrapment. "But, my sister," she pleaded. "She's ill. I need to get her medicine." Kalen's expression was unreadable stone. "Give Gregor the details. She will be cared for. Better than you ever could." He paused, his gaze dropping to her lips, then back to her wide, terrified eyes. "Your only concern, from this moment on, is my son. And me. Do you understand, Ilara?" The days that followed blurred into a strange routine of gilded captivity. Ilara's world shrank to the royal wing of the Onyx Keep, the warm nursery, a small but comfortable adjoining bedroom, and a private garden balcony that overlooked a sheer drop into the mists. Gregor delivered her meals, his face as impassive as ever, and confirmed that her sister was being attended by the finest physicians in the city, a relief so profound it almost made her imprisonment bearable. Almost. But she was watched. Always. Sometimes it was a guard standing just a little too close in the hallway. Other times, it was the unnerving sensation of the king's gaze on her from a shadowed alcove or a high gallery as she played with Valerius in the nursery. He was a ghost in his own home, a constant, oppressive presence. Her fear of him slowly began to curdle into a simmering resentment, but it was a feeling she had to bury deep. For Valerius's sake. With the baby, there was no fear. There was only a bond that grew stronger each day. He was a placid, happy infant in her arms. He would follow her with his unervingly intelligent silver eyes, gurgling when she spoke to him. His tiny hands would grip her finger with surprising strength. And whenever he grew fussy, whenever a flicker of that painful, primal magic threatened to overwhelm him, she would sing. The ancient lullaby was her shield and her key. It calmed him instantly, the magic in the words weaving a cocoon of peace around them. She began to notice other things, too. A vase of flowers on the mantel, wilted and dying, seemed to perk up, their petals unfurling slightly as she sang. A flickering candle flame would steady and burn brighter. It was unnerving, a magic she didn't understand and didn't want. One evening, a visiting courtier, a sharp-faced vampire named Lord Forlag with eyes like chips of ice, entered the nursery unannounced. He claimed he was bringing a gift for the prince. He bowed shallowly to Alara, his smile a predatory slash. "The king places great trust in you, little human," he said, his voice a silken purr. A remarkable display of faith, there was a mocking edge to his tone that set her teeth on edge. He held out a small, silver rattle. As he moved it closer to the bassinet where Valerius was sleeping, the baby whimpered, his face scrunching up in distress. A wave of cold, malevolent energy washed over Alara, making the hairs on her arms stand up. Instinct took over. She stepped between Forlag and the bassinet. "The prince is sleeping," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. "Perhaps another time," Forlag's eyes narrowed. "I insist," he pushed past her, extending the rattle over the child. Valerius let out a sharp cry of pain. Without thinking, Alara grabbed Forlag's wrist. His skin was cold as marble. "I said no." For a moment, he simply stared at her hand on his arm, his shock palpable. Then, a low growl rumbled in his chest. "You dare touch me?" Before he could react further, the king's voice cracked through the room like a whip. Forlag Kalen stood in the doorway, his presence sucking all the air from the room. His eyes were not on the other vampire. They were on Alara's hand, still gripping Forlag's wrist. "Leave." Now Forlag snatched his arm back as if burned, shot Alara a look of pure venom, and vanished from the room with silent, vampiric speed. Alara was left trembling, her heart hammering. Kalen approached, his expression unreadable. He looked from her to the sleeping, now peaceful child, and then back to her. "You were right to stop him." He reached out, not to her, but to the silver rattle that Forlag had dropped on the rug. He picked it up, and as his fingers closed around it, the silver hissed and blackened, crumbling into dust. Accursed object. It would have tormented him. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than suspicion in his eyes. It was a flicker of respect. And something else. Something deeper, more complicated, that made her own breath catch in her throat. Kalen watched her from the shadows of the nursery's archway, a habit he had developed over the past week. He told himself it was for security. He told himself he was observing a potential threat, a living anomaly. He was lying. He came to watch her with his son. He watched the way her entire demeanor softened when she held Valerius, the genuine affection in her smile, the gentle way she traced the shell of his ear. She was not faking it. No one, not even the most skilled spy, could fake that kind of unblemished tenderness. He had seen her stand up to Lord Forlag, a vampire 5 centuries her senior, and a known rival for influence in his court. She had done it without hesitation, a fierce, fragile guardian protecting her charge. The sight had stirred something in his cold, dead heart he hadn't felt since Alara, his queen, had lived. Protective pride. This girl was a paradox. She was humanly breakable, yet possessed an iron will. She was an orphan with no knowledge of her past, yet she held the key to an ancient, powerful bloodline. He had his scribes and historians scouring the archives, searching for any record of Lumen survivors from the Ashwood massacre 500 years ago. They found scattered whispers, rumors of a child spirited away, of a branch of the family that had gone into hiding among humans, their powers eventually diluting and fading over generations. Perhaps she was the result of that dilution. A dormant gene, a latent spark, accidentally ignited by the magical distress of a royal vampire infant. A 1 in a billion chance. Or fate. He despised fate. Fate had taken his wife from him. Tonight, Valerius was teething. His first fangs were pushing through his gums, a painful process for any vampire fledgling. His cries were sharp, laced with the agony of the transformation. Kaelin felt every stab of it through their bond. He saw Alara lift the crying child, her own face etched with sympathy. She began to walk him, her steps a slow, measured rhythm. And then, she began to sing. Somnus in Ima, quis in Ima, sleep soul, quiet soul. The effect was instantaneous. The magical pressure in the room, a chaotic storm of infant power, began to coalesce. It didn't just disappear, it ordered itself, the chaotic energy smoothing out into gentle waves. Through the bond, Kaelin felt his son's pain lessen, replaced by a warm, tingling numbness. He watched, fascinated, as Alara rested her palm on Valerius's cheek, her thumb stroking his jaw. As she sang, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer of silver-gold light emanated from her hand, visible only to his vampiric sight. It was the light of the lumen, the pure, life-affirming magic that was the antithesis of their own dark existence. It wasn't just soothing the pain, it was healing it, accelerating the process. She was a living balm, a walking miracle. And she was in his keep, under his protection, entirely unaware of what she was. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't a weapon to be used against him. She was a treasure to be protected. The threats against his throne, from men like Forlag and the rogue clans in the north, suddenly seemed 10 times more dangerous. They weren't just threats to his son anymore. They were threats to her. And the thought of any harm coming to this girl, this impossible, gentle, fierce human, ignited a rage in him so profound it was terrifying. The attack came without warning. It was the darkest hour before dawn, a time when the keep was at its quietest. Alara was dozing in the armchair, Valerius asleep in his bassinet beside her. A sudden, jarring crash from the balcony shattered the peace. The glass of the heavy doors imploded inward, spraying shards across the floor. 2 figures, clad in dark leather and moving with a predatory crouch, dropped into the room. Rogues. Their eyes burned with a feral red light, and the stench of stale blood and violence clung to them. Their target was obvious. They moved toward the bassinet. Alara's blood ran cold. There was no time to scream, no time to call for the guards who were clearly already dead or disabled. There was only her, the assassins, and the baby. A primal instinct she didn't know she possessed surged through her. She launched herself in front of the bassinet, her arms spread wide. No, she gasped, her voice shaking but resolute. The first rogue sneered, revealing elongated canines. He backhanded her, the blow casual but brutal. The force sent her staggering sideways, her head cracking against the stone mantelpiece. Stars exploded behind her eyes, and pain, sharp and blinding, ripped through her skull. She crumpled to the floor, her vision swimming. Through the haze, she saw the second rogue reaching into the bassinet. Valerius, awakened by the violence, let out a piercing shriek of terror and pain. That sound cut through her daze like a razor. It was a call to the deepest part of her soul. She couldn't get up. Her body wouldn't obey. But she could sing. Lying on the cold floor, blood trickling from a cut on her temple, she drew a ragged breath and sang. Not the gentle lullaby of before, but the same words, the same melody, imbued with every ounce of her desperation, her terror, her fierce, unyielding love for the child. Nox an Ima, lux an Ima. The words were not a whisper now. They were a command. A wave of force, visible even to her human eyes as a ripple of shimmering golden light, erupted from her. It slammed into the two rogues like a physical fist. They were thrown backward, howling as the light seared their undead flesh. They crashed into the far wall, their bodies smoking where the light had touched them. The first rogue, recovering, snarled and charged again. Elara pushed herself onto her elbows, her head pounding, and focused all her will, all her intent on the song. Cor meum ad te clama. My heart calls to you. This time, the light wasn't a wave. It was a shield. A dome of incandescent, silver-gold energy snapped into existence around her and the bassinet, humming with power. The rogue slammed into the barrier and was repelled, his hand burning, flesh blackening and turning to ash. He shrieked in agony and fury. It was at that exact moment that the nursery doors burst open. Kalen stood there, a blur of motion and death. His face was a mask of absolute fury, his eyes glowing with crimson rage. He took in the scene in a fraction of a second, the shattered doors, the cowering rogues, the shimmering shield, and Elara on the floor, bleeding but still singing, her voice the anchor of the impossible magic protecting his son. He didn't hesitate. He became a whirlwind of shadow and steel, and the fight was over before it truly began. There were two wet, final sounds and then silence. The shield flickered and died as Elara's strength gave out, her voice faltering. Her vision tunneled to black, the last thing she saw was Kalen's face as he knelt beside her, his expression one of horrified awe. Kalen gathered her into his arms as gently as if she were made of spun glass. The feel of her, so fragile and yet so powerful, was a dizzying contradiction. Her blood was warm against his hand, the scent of it a maddening call to his nature, but it was drowned out by the lingering, incandescent scent of her magic. The scent of the lumen. He had seen it. A full manifestation. Not a flicker of light, not a subtle healing, but a shield of pure, defensive power. The kind of power legends were written about. He carried her to her bed, his movements swift and silent. He laid her down, his healers already swarming into the room to tend to her, while others secured his son. He waved them away from her. This he had to do himself. He gently cleaned the gash on her temple with a cloth dipped in a healing solution, his touch feather-light. Her skin was pale, her breathing shallow. The expenditure of power had exhausted her, nearly to the point of death. He sat by her bedside for hours, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest. The mystery of her was solved. She was no spy. She was the last of a lost lineage, a miracle walking in his world, completely unaware of her own heritage. The lullaby wasn't just a song, it was an incantation, a key to the power sleeping in her blood. And her love for his son, a love so fierce she would shield him with her own body and soul, was the catalyst that had awakened it. Lord Forlag had sent those rogues. Kalen knew it with cold certainty. The attack was too clean, the guards' patrol patterns too perfectly exploited. It was a test. A test of her and a test of him. Forlag would pay. His death would be slow and educational for anyone else who thought the king's heir was a pawn in their games. But that was a problem for later. The immediate problem, the beautiful, terrifying problem, was the woman sleeping in this bed. He had brought her here as a nanny, a tool. He had kept her here as a prisoner, an object of suspicion. Now, everything had changed. She was not a subject. She was not a servant. She was a power in her own right, the sole heir to a legacy as old and significant as his own. When she finally stirred, her eyelids fluttering open, he was still there. Her hazel eyes, cloudy with confusion, found his. Valerius, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Is he safe? Her first thought was for his son. Always for his son. The knowledge settled deep in his chest, a warmth he had not felt in over a century. He is safe, Kalen said, his voice softer than he'd ever heard it. Because of you, he watched her process, saw the memory of the light, the shield, the burning rogues, return to her eyes. Fear followed. Fear of herself. What was that? What did I do? She asked, her hand rising to her head, where only smooth, healed skin remained. You saved him, Kaelin said simply. He took a breath. The time for suspicion and secrets was over. Ilara. What I am about to tell you will be difficult to believe. But it is the truth. Your lullaby is not just a song. It is an awakening. The blood of your ancestors, a line of powerful magic wielders called the Lumen, runs in your veins. You are the last of them. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. That's impossible. I'm just, me. I'm no 1 inch, you are not no one, he insisted, his voice firm but gentle. You are the heir to a power that was thought to be extinct. A power that complements and protects my own. A power that makes you one of the most important people in this world. And one of the most endangered. The weight of his words settled in the room, heavy and absolute. He saw the terror in her eyes, but beneath it, a tiny spark of understanding. The strange occurrences, the healing, the shield. It wasn't a fluke. It was her. Ilara stared at him, the king's words echoing in the silent room. Lumen. A lost lineage. Magic. It felt like a story, a fairy tale told to frighten children, not the reality of her life. But the memory of the golden light, the searing heat, the way the vampires had screamed when it touched them, that was real. The power had come from her. Why? She finally managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. Why me? Kaelin's dark eyes held hers, and for the first time, she saw the mask of the king fall away completely. In its place was the face of a man burdened by centuries of loss and responsibility. I don't know if it is fate or chance, he said, his voice low and raw with an emotion she couldn't name. But I know that your ancestors and mine were bound by ancient alliances. The Lumen light was the only thing that could suit the unique afflictions of our bloodline, and in turn, our strength provided the ultimate protection for yours. We were two halves of a whole. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She was not just a nanny. She was a prophecy. A political asset. A living relic. The thought was suffocating. So that's what I am to you, she asked, the words tasting like ash. A tool. A magical remedy for your son. A weapon to protect your throne. The hurt in her voice was plain, and she saw him flinch as if she had struck him. He reached out, hesitated, and then captured her hand in his. His skin was cool, but not cold, and his grip was surprisingly gentle. When you first came here, you were a mystery, he admitted, his thumb stroking over her knuckles. When I heard the song, I feared you were a threat. But now. Ilara, when I saw you on that floor, bleeding to protect my son, all I felt was terror that I would lose you. His confession hung in the air between them, more intimate than any touch. You are not a tool. You are the woman who saved my child. The woman who faced down assassins with nothing but a song. The woman who makes this empty fortress feel like a home again. His vulnerability was a more potent weapon than any display of power. It disarmed her completely. She looked at their joined hands, his large and pale against her smaller, warmer one. She was terrified. Of the power inside her, of the enemies she now had, of this formidable, ancient being who was looking at her as if she were the sunrise. But she was not the same girl who had walked into this keep a week ago. She had faced monsters and found a strength she never knew she had. She had found a purpose in protecting a helpless child. And she was beginning to find something else in the eyes of his father. I'm scared, she confessed, her voice small. You have every right to be, he said softly. But you are not alone in this. I will not let anyone harm you, he paused, his gaze intense. But the choice must be yours. Your power is your own. Your life is your own. I can have my guards escort you away from here, to a new life, hidden and safe. No one would ever find you. Or you can stay. Stay here, with me, with Valerius. Learn to control your power. Help me protect my son and my kingdom. Find your place beside us, he was offering her an escape. True freedom. But leaving meant leaving Valerius. It meant leaving him. The thought of walking away, of returning to a world without the sweet weight of the baby in her arms or the intense, magnetic pull of the king's presence, felt like a different kind of death. It was the choice between a safe, empty life and a dangerous, meaningful one. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not a king or a vampire but Kaelan. A father. A lonely man. Her protector. Her, something more. She squeezed his hand. I'll stay. A week later, the great hall of the Onyx Keep was filled with the vampire nobility for the seasonal address. It was a sea of dark silks and pale faces, ancient beings whose politics were as sharp and deadly as their fangs. Whispers had been slithering through the court for days. Whispers of the failed attack on the nursery, of the king's new human nanny who was kept under constant guard, of Lord Forlag's sudden and permanent retirement to the deepest cells beneath the keep. Elara stood in a shadowed alcove overlooking the hall, Valerius held securely in her arms. Kaelan had insisted she be here. They need to see you, he had said. They need to understand. Kaelan stood on the dais, a commanding figure of absolute authority. He spoke of treaties and borders, his voice resonating with power. Then, he paused. There has been an attempt on the life of my son, the heir to this throne, he announced, his voice dropping to a dangerously cold level. A collective, sibilant inhale came from the assembled court. The traitor has been dealt with. But the attack revealed a truth long thought lost to us. He turned, his crimson gaze finding Elara in the shadows. He held out his hand. Elara. Come, every head in the hall turned. Heart hammering, Elara walked out of the shadows and into the light, Valerius cooing softly in her arms. She walked to the dais and stood beside Kaelan, her chin held high. She could feel hundreds of ancient, predatory eyes on her, dissecting her. The king took her hand, his cool strength a comforting anchor. For 500 years, we have believed the lumen line to be extinguished, Kaelan proclaimed, his voice ringing with triumph. We were wrong. The blood lives on. Here. In the woman who saved my son's life with the power of her ancestors, he lifted her hand, displaying it to the stunned court. Elara of the Lumen is under my personal protection. She is a friend to this court. Any threat to her is a threat to me. Any insult to her is an act of treason. Let all here bear witness. A sudden, desperate snarl erupted from the crowd. A lesser lord, a known ally of Forlag, lunged forward, his face contorted in a mask of fury. She is a human abomination. A trick. He moved with blinding speed, aiming for Elara. Kaelan moved to intercept, but he didn't need to. Elara reacted on pure instinct. She didn't flinch. She didn't scream. Holding Valerius securely with one arm, she raised her free hand, palm out. She didn't sing. She willed. A focused beam of golden light, pure and brilliant as the heart of a star, shot from her palm. It struck the vampire square in the chest. He screamed, not in pain, but in shock, as the light threw him back into the crowd, smoking and stunned but otherwise unharmed. She had controlled it. A weapon but also a warning. A perfect, measured response. A silence, absolute and profound, fell over the great hall. Every vampire stared, not at their king, but at her. At the human girl holding their prince, who had just effortlessly subdued one of their own. Kaelan looked at her, his eyes blazing with pride and an emotion so deep, so possessive, it stole her breath away. In that moment, before the entire court, he leaned in and pressed his lips to her temple. A public, definitive claim. Later that night, the keep was quiet again. The court was reeling, the power dynamics of centuries shifting on a single point of golden light. In the nursery, the hearth fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Elara sat in the rocking chair, Valerius sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. The door opened and Kaelan entered. He looked at her, his expression soft. He had shed the heavy regalia of the king, and was dressed in simple black, looking younger, more approachable. He knelt before her chair, his eye level with hers. "You were magnificent," he said, his voice a low murmur. "I have never been more proud," she smiled, a true, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I was terrified, I know," he said. "But you did not let it rule you. You chose courage." He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. "You have a home here, Elara. A family. If you will have us," her heart, which had been a frightened bird for so long, finally settled. She looked from his earnest, hopeful face to the sleeping child in her arms. This strange, dark, beautiful world. This impossible man and his miraculous son. It was dangerous. It was uncertain. But it was hers. "I already have," she whispered. She leaned in, and this time, when his lips met hers, it was not a claim of protection, but a kiss of equals. A promise. She felt a faint warmth spread through her veins, a resonance that had nothing to do with her power, but everything to do with his. A bond, not of prophecy, but of choice. She pulled back slightly and began to hum, the soft notes of the ancient lullaby filling the quiet room. After a moment, a low, resonant baritone joined her, a harmony she had never heard but that her soul recognized. Kaylin was singing with her. The song of their joined past and their chosen future.